Hey everybody, if you're new here, my name's Kelly. Today's video will be sharing how I made a few different styles of macrame ornaments. This is a collaborative Christmas series with A Thrifty Notion, which is a fabric store located in Ogden, Kansas. It is primarily a dead stock and secondhand fabric store, and I've actually worked for the shop owner Liv for over 5 years. I've since moved back home to Tennessee, but I'm still working for Liv remotely, and I'm really excited about some new opportunities to continue making content for Thrifty and do some collaborations between my channel and Thrifty's channel. So it's really fun, really exciting, and I hope that you guys enjoy it. So before we get into the specifics of how I made each of these ornaments, I will share with you the knots that you'll need to know for this project. There are 3 different knots that I used for these ornaments, and once you know those 3, you can make so many different designs. I will share exactly what steps I used to make these ornaments, but keep in mind that you can customize them to your own taste. You can add different colors of macrame cord or yarn. You can add different colors of beads. You could add little baubles to them hanging down from the bottom. You don't have to do the tassel at the bottom. You could cut it shorter and add something to the bottom to cover up where the yarns end. There's so many things you can do here. So keep an open mind, be creative with it. So for the knots, I will be sharing some graphics here of how you tie the knots, because it was really hard to show exactly how the knots are done when I was working with a round object. It was just very fiddly. The ornament was moving around a lot, so it's harder to see. But I will share graphics here, and I will link some resources down below if you're wanting to learn the knots and get a more in-depth video of how to do them. So before we get into talking about the knots, I will say that there's also a very special trick that I learned while making these ornaments. I came up with it. I will say I'm probably not the first person to do it this way, but I've never seen anyone else do it. And after making a few ornaments, it just occurred to me that I could do it a little bit differently, and I like the way that I did them later on a lot better. So I will share that tip with you later on in the video. But let's get into the knots. So the first knot you're gonna need to learn is a lark's head knot. This is a knot that if you're making something like a wall hanging, you would typically use to attach your cords to a dowel or a stick of some kind. So for this ornament, we're gonna be attaching the decorative cords to a base cord that will wrap around the top of the ornament. And this is where the tip I have comes in. All of the tutorials and all of the videos I've ever seen about macrame ornaments have suggested that you cut your decorative cords and then you cut a separate base cord that will wrap around the top of the ornament and you tie shut. I did this on a couple of them, and then it occurred to me that I could just make a longer base cord that then transitions into being one of the decorative cords. So what I chose to do was make 9 decorative cords and 1 longer base cord. I attached all of the decorative cords with a lark's head knot, and then when I tied it around the top of the ornament, I just tied a standard knot where that lark's head knot would technically be if it was another decorative cord, and it will look different than your lark's head knots. I'm trying to find where it is on this one. Oh, it's not on this one, that's why. That's the one I did with the original method where you just tie the strings separately, but on this one, it's hard to tell, you guys. So on this one, you can see we have 2 lark's head knots right here. And then on this guy, we have 1 lark head knot and 1 just regular knot right here. It's actually really hard to tell that it's not the same as all of the rest of them. And then your spacing ends up being a little bit more even, because when you're having to tie a different knot underneath one of these pieces, you can see this one's a lot bigger, and that's because there's a knot hidden underneath this as best I could. And so it just kind of messes up the spacing and it doesn't look as nice. So like I said, all the tutorials that I've seen in the past have suggested that you use a base cord and then your cords that come down. I would suggest that you just make a longer base cord, tie a standard knot where that lark's head knot would be, and then take those 2 cords down and they become part of your decorative cords. The next knot that we used is a square knot, and the important thing to keep in mind about this one is that it's kind of a double-sided knot where you do the steps on one side and then you do the steps on the other side, and that's what makes a complete knot. So for each square knot, you're gonna be actually doing the steps twice, 1 on each side. So when I say I did 4 square knots, I did 4 right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left. And this is a very simple knot. It can be a little bit tricky if you get off track of which side you just did. And I haven't done a lot of macrame, so sometimes I get confused and I have to undo them and start over just to make sure I did it right. But that's just the case for me because I'm constantly crafting while watching TV, and sometimes that can be a bad mix. The last knot that you're going to use, I don't actually know the name of. I will pop up the name right here, but it is the knot that you use to make friendship bracelets. So if you made those before, you know what knot I'm talking about. I used it on this ornament a little bit, and normally it would wrap around like it does on this guy, but on this ornament, I kind of coaxed it flat. All right, you guys, so now that you're familiar with the knots, maybe watch the tutorials down below. We can start making our ornaments. So for this first ornament that I made, which is about 3.5 inches in diameter, I would suggest cutting 9 cords at about 28 inches, a little longer if you want some more wiggle room, and then cutting 1 cord at least 4 inches longer than that, so 32 inches to be your base cord that will wrap around the top and tie in a knot. Once you have that, you will attach your 9 shorter cords to your longer cord using a lark's head knot, and then wrap it around the top of the ornament, tie it in a tight knot at the top, and pull all of your lark's head knots tight. So once they're all attached to the top of the ornament, we're going to be tying these little square knots. You do this by separating out your cords into groups of 4. So because we had 10 cords, and you get 2 from each of those, there will be 20 cords, which means you'll have 5 groups of 4. So you get this nice little star effect on top of the ornament. And once you have those groups of 4, you're going to tie 1 square knot at the very top of the ornament. After you do that, you're going to find the point between 2 square knots, and you're going to take 2 cords from each side of those 2 knots so that you can make a square knot centered below the point between those 2 knots. So all you're going to do is really just tie another row of these square knots, and instead of just tying 1 knot, you're going to do 2, because that'll make it more similar in size to what we have up here, where the lark's head knots kind of blend into those square knots. So we're going to do 2 knots here, and that'll just be offset from the ones you did above. And like I said, you do that by taking 2 from the sides of each of the knots above, and then you make those guys. And then same thing again, and you just do a 3rd row. Very, very simple, repeating the same kind of steps over and over. And then you just pull it really tight down at the bottom, tie a knot. What I did to get my knots as tight as possible was that I tied a knot with a larger string really tight, and then I pulled and pulled and straightened out and pulled everything, and then I took a thinner string and I tied it above that larger knot really tight, like again as tight as I could, and then I took off the larger string. So the larger string was really just to hold everything in place while I pulled everything tight and smooth on the ornament, and then the smaller string is the one that will actually hold everything in place and keep it secure. And then after doing that, to make this tassel look like this, you will want to brush it out with a pet brush. And if you don't have a pet brush, you can get them really cheap at the dollar store. So the second ornament is super simple. This is actually the one that gave me the idea of incorporating the base cord into the design. So this one actually has 11 cords just because I had to cut 10 and then the 1 base cord, and then I just pulled the base cord down into the design. And all I did here was tie the lark's head knots around the top and then just pull the cords down in their little groupings and tie a tassel at the bottom. It's so simple, but I love the effect it gives. And this one would be a really fun one if you did alternating colors of macrame cord or yarn and had like kind of a candy cane design to it. That would be awesome. It would also be really cute if you had a white ornament and did like red stripes on top of it or green stripes, something like that. This would be a great way to upcycle ornaments that you have that may be scratched that you want to cover up a little bit. You could add a base layer of paint and then add macrame on top, or you could just do macrame over the scratched ornament because it'll cover up most of it. So this one's really simple, but like I said, I love the effect that it gives, and I decided, because of its simplicity, to add a little gold bow at the bottom. The next ornament is another of the larger size, and for this one, I don't really have great measurements to give you. I would just say cut your cords long enough that you're gonna have plenty to tie all of these knots. I don't think they were drastically longer than the measurements I gave for the first ornament, so there are more knots here, but the cord went pretty far. I will say I had to cut my tassel a little bit shorter because I did start to run out near the bottom, but I really love how this one came out because I incorporated wooden beads into it. And this is again one that you could totally make your own by doing different colored beads. You could omit the beads if you wanted to, but I just thought it was a really fun touch to add a little pop of something different. So for this one, I attached all of the cords with a lark's head knot and tied those square knots at the top, just like the first ornament we made. After tying those square knots, I took the outermost cords from each square knot, so the furthest right and the furthest left cord, and I added a bead to each of those. After doing that, I pulled the 2 cords from one side of one knot, 2 cords from the other, kind of like we did on the first ornament, and then tied 4 square knots. at the bottom of those 4 square knots, I put beads on each of the cords, and then I pulled down the 2 sides. And on those 2 sides, I did the knot that I'm gonna refer to as the friendship bracelet knot. I did that, I think 4 times, 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. I took the 2 cords from one side of the square knot, 2 cords from the other, and I did the friendship bracelet knot 6 times on each of them. I kind of pressed it flat to the ornament so it wouldn't be doing the twisty thing that it naturally does, but if you like the look of that, you could keep it kind of twisty. I will say, because we're only doing 6 knots, it's not going to be a super dramatic twist, and that's why I chose to kind of press it flat. And then after doing that, I just pulled all of the cords to the base of the ornament, tied them in a knot, and I added a gold bow on this one as well. So the last ornament I have to show you is one that is kind of inspired by a wreath, and this one is very simple, but it is another one that you could customize any way you want, and I have a few suggestions. So all I did was take a little metal ring, and I took one very long cord. I didn't measure it, so just make sure it's plenty long, and if you have extra at the end, you can cut it off and save it for something else. And I just took that cord, tied it to the top of the ring, leaving a long tail, like probably 8 inches long minimum. And then I started tying the friendship bracelet knot all the way around the ring. I kept tightening it, pushing it down, keeping it twisted really nicely until I got to the end and got it as many knots on there as I could. And then I took the long string I left at the beginning and the string I left at the end, and I tied them in a little bow, and I added a hanger. So this is one where if you wanted to, you could omit the bow and you could add a little picture behind here, have it be a little frame. You could keep the bow and just cut the tail shorter so they don't cover up the picture as much, or like glue them off to the side. You could keep it simple like this and just add some embellishments. So you could wrap some little thin decorative cord around and make it look more like a wreath with little buttons or beads or paint, like little baubles on there. All right, you guys, sorry if that last clip ended a little bit abruptly. I ran out of room on my camera, but I just wanted to pop back in and say thank you so much for watching. I hope my instructions were clear enough that if there is some confusion, hopefully combined with the resources I'll link down below, you'll be able to make these ornaments for yourself. If you do, I would love to see them. Please tag me on Instagram. I will link my accounts down below, and I will also be linking a Thrifty Notions channel, so don't forget to check them out and give them a subscribe if you want to keep up with all of the videos in this series over December. I'm so excited you're here. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.